Jóvenes vestidas de civil y un joven también de seguridad del Estado fueron detenidas momentáneamente y les pidieron que pudieran continuar hacia la sede. Ahí ellas estuvieron alrededor de unos 20 o 30 minutos esperando el ómnibus para poderse retirar del lugar y inmediatamente después de poco rato llegó un ómnibus vacío que ella piensa que fue ordenado para la seguridad del Estado para que lo sacara del lugar. Eso fue sobre las 10 de la mañana y luego después a las 11:55 de la mañana salía yo de aquí de la sede nacional, estuve en la parada, esperando aquí en la parada que está en Porvenir y rápidamente vi una patrulla, el carro con chapa particular del Ministerio del Interior y fueron siguiendo el ómnibus hasta tanto yo...
Creo en Jesucristo, su único Hijo, nuestro Señor.
Detenida, dos de estas mujeres que me quería o me trató el celular, arañarme, alarme, empujándome para poderme conducir y llevarme dentro de este carro chapa particular. Entonces me trajeron para acá, para cerca de la sede, alrededor de 20 minutos en la trayectoria.
De otra parte, el artista Luis Manuel Otero Alcántara dijo a través de Diario de Cuba: el movimiento San Isidro es un concepto y no un grupo de personas. Otero Alcántara afirmó que siempre se luchaba por el rapero y que son víctimas de la represión. El movimiento San Isidro existe, va a seguir existiendo por encima de todo, dijo el artista a Diario de Cuba. Lo importante en Cuba ahora, añadió, es posicionarse como los seres que pueden lograr un cambio y generar espacio de pensamiento libre. Y en la cumbre del G7, la reina Isabel II recibirá este domingo al presidente de los Estados Unidos, Joe Biden, y a su esposa Jill en el castillo de Windsor. Esto al término de la cumbre que se celebra en el suroeste de Inglaterra. Está previsto que la pareja sea saludada por la monarca de 95 años en el cuadrilátero que hay frente al castillo antes de presenciar una ceremonia militar. Después de acompañar al comandante de la Guardia Real, el mayor James Taylor, y al general Christopher Giga en la inspección de las tropas, el presidente Biden presenciará junto a la reina y la primera dama un desfile, tras lo cual disfrutarán de un té a la inglesa en el interior del castillo. Biden será el 13º presidente de Estados Unidos que Isabel II reciba formalmente de los 14 que han servido durante sus 69 años de reinado, con la excepción de Lyndon Johnson. Asimismo, desafíos comunes como el comportamiento agresivo de Rusia, el auge de China como potencia mundial, el aumento de los ciberataques y el terrorismo internacional centrarán la reunión cumbre de la OTAN que este lunes arranca en Bruselas, en la que participará el presidente de los Estados Unidos, Joe Biden. Los últimos 4 años han demostrado que el vínculo transatlántico en la OTAN va más allá de dirigentes políticos individuales, porque es robusto y fuerte. Tenemos a la OTAN, que puede capear diferentes vientos políticos, indicó el secretario general de la Alianza, Jens Stoltenberg. La cita será la primera en la que participa el nuevo presidente de los Estados Unidos, después de una legislatura en la que su antecesor Donald Trump cuestionó la autoridad de dicha organización. El Papa Francisco ha lamentado que los niños explotados en el mundo sean más de 150 millones, más que las poblaciones de España, Francia e Italia juntas. Tras el rezo dominical del Ángelus y sumado en la plaza de San Pedro, Francisco recordó que ayer se celebró el Día Mundial contra el Trabajo Infantil.
Ayer se celebró la jornada mundial contra el trabajo minoril. No es posible cerrar los ojos delante de
la estima de la Organización Internacional.
Según la estima de la Organización Internacional del Trabajo, los niños hoy que utilizan para que trabajen son más 150 millones. Más o menos como todos los habitantes de España junto a Italia y junto a Francia. Hagamos todos un esfuerzo para que se elimine la esclavitud de estos tiempos.
Asistencia técnica Daniela Fuentes Cortés. Voz informativa Ricardo Espinosa para Radio y Televisión Martí. Radio Martí presenta Abriendo Espacios, un programa de la mujer cubana. Media hora de radio para que su se haga visible. Abriendo Espacios. Un programa de Radio Martí conducido por Ariane González.
Bienvenidos Bienvenidos una vez más a Abriendo Espacios, este programa dedicado a la mujer cubana con temas que importan a las féminas, pero también que importan a toda la población. Y en Abriendo Espacios analizamos 4 anteproyectos referentes a este nuevo Código de la Familia que se puede llegar a implementar dentro de la isla y sobre todo la observación que está realizando la sociedad civil con respecto a ello. Así que, como siempre, tenemos invitados muy importantes, personas que están trabajando muy seriamente con este tema dentro de la isla. Nos vuelve a acompañar Marta de la Tamayo, Juan Antonio Madrazo y se incorpora Zelandia Pérez. Las organizaciones que están aquí presentadas, pues está la Red Femenina de Cuba, la Alianza Cubana por la Inclusión y el Comité de Integración Racial. Gracias por estar con nosotros, Marta de la.
Muchísimas gracias a ustedes. Buen día por acá.
Zelandia, gracias otra vez por estar. Y Juan Antonio Madrazo, gracias nuevamente por estar con nosotros.
Gracias a ustedes por acompañarnos al cambio de información.
Bueno, pues vamos a comenzar ya de lleno directamente en este debate que tenemos y este análisis con respecto al nuevo Código de las Familias, porque hay temas que son importantísimos y evidentemente dentro de este nuevo Código de las Familias que el gobierno cubano pues quiere implementar también. Vamos a estar hablando de la situación de las niñas y de los niños dentro de la sociedad. Así que le cedo el micrófono. Martadela, ¿quieres comenzar hablando?
Who comes anywhere near me at any given time has any doubt in their mind of what I do for a living. It's very clear to everybody.
What is it that you do?
I buy houses.
Oh, I knew that. I should have known, especially because we're on the radio talking about it.
Even the jerk at the Dunkin' Donuts knows what I do for a living now.
Yes, he does.
Yes, he does.
All right. Why don't we talk a little? By the way, I have to tell you where I was today.
Sure, go ahead.
I was at a graduation party for one of our students' son graduated from high school, and I was at his graduation party today.
Whose son was this?
It was Scott.
Scott who?
Yeah, I don't want to give last name, but yeah, Scott and his son Nick was graduating.
Mm-hmm.
It was it was kind of cool. I went there. We had some sandwiches and some cake and. You know, no Dunkin' Donuts coffee, though, but it'll be all right.
Did you...
Estos 4 anteproyectos que se están presentando a la Asamblea Nacional en el mes de julio,
sí.
4 anteproyectos que atraviesan por la vida del ciudadano cubano, ¿verdad? Entonces, desde la observación de los derechos electorales en tiempos que no hay elecciones, pero que también se observa lo que es toda la legislatura interna del país, nosotros los y las ciudadanas cubanas tenemos derecho y parte a observar el proceso, claro. Donde además se hace necesaria la formación, la capacitación de los observadores que trabajarán en el momento en la consulta popular en las calles una vez que este anteproyecto salga después del mes de julio como se ha anunciado, ¿no?
O sea, en el mes de julio es cuando se debe presentar, Martadela, entonces este tipo de proyecto.
El mes de julio es donde estos anteproyectos ya deben de estar en la Asamblea Nacional y en el caso del proyecto, ¿no? El código de las familias debe entonces de salir.
Régional et international. Nous retrouvons nos invités, addiction, professeur de
iwas, pagkontrol at pag-stop sa fire. Nakatuon din ang estratehiyang ito sa pag-iwas sa mga negatibong epekto ng COVID.
Absolutely. None of the employees of the company actually were winning, and so they had this global network of administrators, what they refer to as influencers, individuals who would sort of hype up the capability, and then the distribution network. And so just this week, all of those individuals who were unwittingly working for the FBI and international law enforcement have all now been arrested for the criminal scheme to market this technical capability that was used exclusively by criminals.
And you were talking about the long-term repercussions of this, and the one that strikes me immediately is, who are these criminals that haven't been arrested yet? Who are they going to trust? What happens to them now and their networks?
There will certainly be a significant amount of activity right now within criminal circles to evaluate their exposure, who's been using this tool over the past 3 years, what did they use it for, and trying to understand their potential exposure and liability and potential forthcoming arrest or indictment. It also will be significant and interesting to see if there were certain larger organizations that were more reliant on this tool than others, and to see if that potentially alters some type of balance in the international criminal networks for organizations that abstain from using this platform or the others that have been disruptive by law enforcement. Certainly they're likely more confident that their activities are going to be less susceptible to disruption now and going forward. So there's a potential sort of altering of the global power balance between some of these larger organizations, depending on the extent to which they use different encrypted tools or other means of communication.
Jake Harrington. During the operation, the authorities seized vehicles and weapons, as well as 8 tons of cocaine and $48 million worth of currencies and cryptocurrencies. And it's cryptocurrency that plays a role in our next story. If you're an attentive Business Weekly listener, you'll remember that a few weeks ago we looked at the Colonial Pipeline story, the big oil pipeline that got hacked and held to ransom for Bitcoin in the States. It's since emerged that most of the $4.4 million ransom has since been recovered. But hackers are making millions from ransomware attacks, and it's a business that's becoming increasingly professional. Ed Butler's been taking a look, and his report starts with the experience of Martin Kelterborn, who runs an office supplies company in Switzerland. He had a really bad start to one day in particular.
That morning when I arrived in the office, I met the girl on the coffee machine, already angry because she couldn't log into the computer, and I went to my desk and tried as well to log in, and just a black screen, and so I took my coffee and walked over to the IT department and opened the door there, and I saw a guy, eyes wide shut, and he told me, listen, I have nothing anymore. Look here is it on that screen. Normally I see all my servers here. They're all gone.
That's Martin Kelterborn, the head of a Swiss office supplies company, who recently found himself facing every boss's worst nightmare. He'd been hacked, his system frozen, and unless he paid up, everything in his firm was at the mercy of the criminal.
We are a normal Swiss office supply company. Why the hell are you hacking us?
Well, if it's any comfort for this businessman, he's not alone these days.
Good evening. Tonight, federal authorities are investigating a major cyber attack targeting America's energy infrastructure. Georgia-based Colonial Pipeline says it was hit by ransomware.
Hackers are holding the foreign exchange company Travelex to ransom. Hospitals are being targeted by hackers launching ransomware attacks.
The University of California system is warning all students and staff about a ransomware cyber attack.
The world's biggest meat producer, UPS, forced to curtail operations after a ransomware attack.
Yeah, it's been hard to miss all the global headlines lately, from oil pipelines to hospitals to meat processing factories. All kinds of businesses are facing ransomware attacks. Computer systems frozen and encrypted, and only reopenable if you pay a ransom to criminals. It's hard to measure precisely, but experts reckon there are something like 8 attacks of this kind in America every single day. In Britain, the National Cybersecurity Centre saw a trebling of reported cases in 2020. Curtis Minder is the CEO and founder of GroupSense, a threat intelligence company that specialises in helping businesses respond and negotiate their way out of ransomware attacks?
Typically, these are individuals acting in usually Eastern European countries, Russia, Belarus, Moldova, countries like this. But we also have some that emanate from Iran, Turkey, things like that.
So let's say some small to medium-sized firm. It's one of these terrifying messages, and I guess it must be terrifying, right? You go into work in the morning and suddenly find all of your software is shut down, all of it is encrypted, you cannot access anything, and somebody is demanding a fee to release all of your software. They call you. What do you do?
These folks are going through a pretty tough time, so what part of my job is coaching them through the process, helping them understand what the potential outcomes are. Ultimately, a business decision needs to be made on whether to pay a ransom.
And which way do most companies tend to jump?
The majority end up making some form of payment, and if we are doing our job well, which we have a pretty good success rate, they pay a fraction of what the original asking price is, between 10 and 40%, depending on the situation.
How do you talk to them? I mean, what tone of voice do you adopt?
So first of all, we're not on the phone. Most of the time, this is done over an encrypted communications channel. Usually, we're talking about a dark website that has an embedded chat function. Tone and visual cues are very important. We don't have those. Those are difficult to convey over text, but there is a lot of things you can learn in the text. These people are not typically English as first language. We can see shifts in their language, so we know when they switch people, and they do in the middle of the process. So we can track all of that, but it is more difficult to do than if you were on a phone call, for example.
Do you sweet talk them as you go, or is there an emotional dimension to this?
I think there is, but especially the ransomware gangs, they're professionals at this point. They see through gimmicks and tricks like that. So I would not insult them with false statements. I think one of the things I tell the victims is, as difficult as it may sound, we are going to negotiate in good faith, as if this is a business transaction.
Are you talking to the same people again and again? I mean, presumably you are. If you're working for multiple clients, you may find yourself with the same ransomware gang multiple times, and they may know that it's you talking to them.
They may know. We don't go out of our way to announce that, but yes, we have, I like to call them repeat customers pretty frequently.
This whole scheme seems to have taken off. I mean, is that your impression? Is there a huge increase in this in the last year or two?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's partially due to the automation of it. If you're familiar with the concept of ransomware as a service, a threat actor now can get access to a network and basically lease the apparatus to do the ransomware operation from the ransomware gangs. And in addition to that, there is a concept called an initial access broker. These are people that are breaking into the networks and simply selling the network access. So someone with a little bit of Bitcoin could simply buy the access to a network and lease the access to ransomware apparatus, and with virtually no technical capability, execute a ransomware attack.
So one guy might be the techie who's figured out the way into a company's network. He's going to sell it on to another bad guy who's going to do the negotiation, or maybe to a third party who will be involved in the financial transaction to extort the cash.
Yeah, and the ransomware as a service typically includes the negotiation services. So the person perpetrating the attack by leasing this access is also leasing the services associated with the negotiation, and then a percentage is taken by the gang and a percentage is taken by the perpetrator.
How many companies are completely destroyed by this that you've had to deal with?
I can't say that any of our clients have been destroyed by it, but we have seen scenarios where companies have been hurt, probably permanently, by the situation. So you can imagine the type of despair that they're conveying on a phone call, often very emotional, sometimes tears. In other cases, the companies are borderline belligerent, where they would like me to use expletives when I talk to the threat actors. And like I said, my job is to temper those things, get it to a logical point where we can have a business conversation with the threat actor.
The FBI says you shouldn't ever pay ransomware. Is that realistic?
No. I mean, for most companies, no. And I'm very friendly with the FBI agents in the various field offices. We encourage clients to engage them in every case. But they're also supportive. They understand the situation the client's in. The one caveat to that is when we're talking about OFAC-sanctioned entities, the Treasury Department and the Office of Foreign Asset Control have a list of folks that you should not transact any business with, and some of these threat actors do surface on that list. And so part of our process is also making sure that the victim's perpetrator is not an OFAC-sanctioned entity.
You're not breaking the law?
No. As long as we're not paying an OFAC-sanctioned entity, we are not breaking the law.
Curtis Minder of the threat intelligence firm GroupSense. Well, he says he's not breaking the law, and US law enforcement has yet to prosecute any firms for paying ransoms. But clearly, the ransom payments are fueling a global free-for-all. One criminal recently announced his retirement from the business, boasting that after just a couple of years, he made $2 billion from this type of extortion. Kim Grauer is the head of research at Chainalysis. It's a firm focusing on the cryptocurrency money trail. Currencies like Bitcoin, which have become the payment method of choice for ransomware attackers because they are so easy to move in vast amounts across borders, hiding your identity by doing it. That doesn't mean, though, she says, that hackers don't leave a trail.
It's actually a pretty common misconception that cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin are completely anonymous and that once you have a ransom payment, it's kind of lost in the ether and there's nothing you can really do. Actually, we can follow the money from that ransom wallet to off-ramps, which provide an opportunity for law enforcement to get that much closer towards figuring out who the criminals are.
So what typically is the journey that ransoms go on as you follow the money?
Very rarely will they just take that money and send it directly to an exchange to cash out. We're able to track how the funds are going through maybe a few different wallets in an attempt to obfuscate detection, and then we can see the funds moving to another person who is involved in this ransomware attack, and we can see them getting paid, and then we can see which services they then choose to send the funds to.
If it is known that this is a ransomware payment, those exchanges where it is cashed out would surely be liable for prosecution, for sanction from, let's say, the US Department of Justice or Treasury, if it was known that an American ransomware payment had reached a specific exchange.
Yeah, definitely. There's actually a concentration of ransomware funds winding up at a very few number of services. There's only a few services that these criminals are choosing to move their funds to. 55% of all laundering money is going to just 270 deposit addresses, and the majority of all of that is just on a few services.
Where are those deposit addresses?
Well, we actually can't say who they are because a lot of this is in part of investigations, for example, and we don't want to impede investigations in any way.
But typically it is being reported that this is happening in the former Soviet Union, for example, Russia, Belarus, Central Asian countries.
Evil Corp, which is also a known Russian...
Are all illegal and banned in global exchanges. It would have a huge impact, wouldn't it, on ransomware? Ransomware has been facilitated by the cryptocurrency age.
Yeah, it's
for companies.
You set your security devices, everything is good, and you worry about it in 2-3 years at a refresh. What's changed now is the mindset. You have to be always on the game.
All about things like two-step identification, authentication of your logins, and you stand a good chance of staying safe and staying free from attack.
Correct. So that should they have a successful attack, it will be very limited damage that they can cause, so they can restore themselves rapidly and not have to pay that ransom.
Sure, but you are paying it. I mean, the FBI says...
Coming up in the next half of Business Weekly, we'll try and work out what the difference is between dumping plastic and recycling it.
Virus vaccinations to poorer countries and raise $100 billion to help them cut carbon emissions. President Biden has hailed the G7 summit as being an extraordinarily collaborative and productive meeting. He said everyone tackled what they called the climate emergency. The group, which included Oxfam, called it an historic missed opportunity. With the Paris Agreement on climate change in doubt. Police in Nicaragua have arrested and detained 4 female members of the opposition UNAMOS party under the country's new treason law. The detainees include are facing off in the European Championships. The match in Amsterdam is the first time the two teams have met at a major football tournament. That's the latest BBC News.
Welcome back to Business Weekly with Lucy Burton. Every year we generate mountains of plastic waste. Dealing with used plastic bags, containers, wrapping and the like remains a huge they need to cope. But it often ends up getting burned or buried rather than being properly recycled. Germany and the UK has been sending a lot of old plastic to Turkey, but not for much longer. The Turkish government will ban the import of most types of plastic waste after revelations that it was being dumped on beaches, as Mike Johnson's been finding out.
Imagine a city with a developed industry, farmlands, garbage is all around, shredded, crushed.
That's Nihan Temiz Atash. She works for the environmental campaign group Greenpeace in Istanbul. According to her, Turkey has become a dumping ground for Europe's unwanted plastic.
Our investigators documented piles of plastic waste dumped illegally by the roadside, in the fields, or spilling into waterways and floating downstream. In many cases, the plastic was on fire or had been burned.
Here's the BBC's Angus Crawford reporting this time last year from a city close to Turkey's southern Mediterranean.
On an industrial scale, all this was sent here for recycling. But now it lines the streets of Adana in southern Turkey. We watch as bag after bag arrives. This Syrian boy says they were given the rubbish and just told to get rid of it. Once dumped, it's often burned.
Nihan Temiz Atash from Greenpeace has been telling me more about where the plastic is coming from.
The top 5 countries that sent the most waste were the UK, Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands and Slovenia in 2020. Some 241 truckloads of plastic waste came from those countries every day.
And how does it make you feel and your friends feel and people that you know? Is this an issue that makes people angry?
Yes, we feel anger because we think that we are not a developed country and we are taking the responsibility of the developed countries. They are sending their waste and they are increasing their recycling ratios and they get rid of unrecyclable mixed plastics and they report to European Commissions and Parliament that they are very recyclable countries, but we have the worst recycling ratio among all of the world and we are still accepting these waste.
But not for much longer. From July the 3rd, Turkey will ban the import of most types of waste plastic. China and Malaysia have made similar moves over the past few years. Nihan Temiz Atash of Greenpeace says the ban can't come soon enough, but thinks it should go further.
It's a milestone in the...
Ụmụntakịrị toro n'ezinụlọ ndị nke Chineke, ile nwatakịrị anya, ị ga-asị na nwatakịrị a bụ
Chirima wano we uwa shani yima na nyande suke ajib koko zomaro koro jirinze maro chira.
And I'm speaking to you from inside our recycling facility.
Son Aemons is managing director of a business called Sado, which operates Europe's largest household plastic film recycling centre based in the Netherlands.
First, we have a belt transporting the bales to the shredder, bringing the shredded film to a storage bunker.
Son Aemons is also president of an industry group called Plastics Recyclers Europe. I asked him why the likes of Germany, Belgium, the UK and his own country, the Netherlands, exported so much unwanted plastic.
One of the reasons is some who are often more influenced by financial aspects. They are looking simple for an alternative to see that they get better money for it and to not foreseeing the consequence. Another one is that they have a limitation on the infrastructure for sorting and recycling of availability. So due to the lack of facilities in collection, sorting and recycling.
Premier député albinos au sein du Parlement kényan, il est aujourd'hui sénateur.
Și așa mai departe, începând deci expozițiile internaționale, să constat că de fapt oul nu există doar la noi.
Intentaba irse ahora de Jan Couto, lo consigue, pero con falta sobre el jugador del Girona, lo protesta Vallecas.
No vale la jugada.
On
avait fait le Covid et à côté du Covid, on avait fait l'appel à distance.
Juntos informaciones sobre el diexismo y las comunicaciones.
buenas noches, queridos amigos, y mi gran agradecimiento por todo el apoyo y las colaboraciones recibidas. Los temas de hoy, mensajes, comentarios y datos técnicos de nuestros oyentes. Espero que todo ande perfectamente bien y que esta misiva os encuentre disfrutando de una excelente salud, todos vacunados y todos tranquilos dentro de la intranquilidad y zozobra que provoca esta pandemia. Escribe Juan Franco Crespo desde Valls, Tarragona, España. Por aquí la vida parece seguir parámetros más normales, aunque cada vez hay menos gente en las calles. Tantos se habrán muerto. Simplemente la gente ha cambiado de hábitos después de casi año y medio enclaustrados. Paseando nos encontramos los que siempre hemos salido, siquiera para ir a comprar la farmacia y el cotidiano. Felicitaros por la excelente programación y darle las gracias a Valerio por colgar en Radio Blog enlaces de Radio Rumanía Internacional. A veces también linkeo otros espacios de la pero de esa manera ya va más rápido y directo, con lo que los aficionados lo tienen más fresco. A veces, según el interés, también lo reboto a otras plataformas culturales o de naturaleza o a la de viajes, por aquello de ser realmente de interés, aunque apenas se coloquen materiales del exterior, de vez en cuando algo se queda. Sigo esperando las QSLs del último trimestre del 2020 y también ya casi las del primer semestre del 2021. Estoy deseando contemplar esas bellezas de las que escriben los colegas que las han recibido. Cuestión de no perder la esperanza de la llegada de las familiares visivas que tan cariñosamente prepara Victoria. Un abrazo a todos desde esta zona del Mediterráneo. Ahora mismo, mientras tecleo estos comentarios, el día está soleado y en calma. De hecho, el sol me da en la espalda y se está muy calentito y deseando llegue el próximo fin de semana para escaparme a la Tierra Alta, a un 100 kilómetros de paz, buenos vinos y buena comida, junto a la tranquilidad y poca gente. ¿Qué más podemos pedir para que el fin de semana sea al margen de ocioso realmente excelente? Veré si hay algún material preparado y os lo hago llegar con la esperanza de que os guste. Por cierto, en clase, suplemento cultural de Ideal Granada, Mi Tierra, han comenzado a publicar los materiales, así que ahí también podemos beber de ellos. Suelen ser más cortos, adaptados a un criterio periodístico y que invita a reflexionar en profundidad para no extenderse más allá de los límites del espacio disponible. Un abrazo a todos y cordiales 73. Muchas gracias por todo, Juan. Un gran abrazo y hasta pronto. Francisco Llerena Vega nos escuchó en Camaná, Arequipa, Perú, y aquí los datos de su último informe. Fecha 3 de junio, hora 23 UTC, frecuencia 11.730, SIMPO 4, receptor Sony XOD 201, antena exterior L invertida. Muchas gracias, Francisco, un cálido saludo desde Bucarest y hasta luego. El día de hoy me acerco otra vez ante vosotros para saludarles y darles dos informes de escucha. Escribe Javier Caleb Hernández Trujillo. Como siempre, les saludo desde Tapachula, Chiapas, México. El día de hoy, 3 de junio, antes de pasar a mi mensaje personal, quiero dejarles los últimos informes, y aunque son dos, me pareció pertinente mandárselos. Y es que, por fin, a las 2 horas UTC, en los 11.780 kHz, se les puede escuchar con una SIMPO de 43333. Me pareció importante hacérselo saber. Aunque la escucha es buena, tiene un poco de interferencia, porque a esa hora la radio de Amazonía de Brasil sigue en emisiones. Por vuestra programación se ve interferida. Me siento muy alegre de que ya estén emitiendo por esa frecuencia. Adjunto 2 audios para que chequen lo que os digo. Ahora sí, pasando a mi mensaje personal, estoy súper contento de poder escucharlos con una buena calidad de emisión. Me siento contento de que estén en la onda corta en sus diversas frecuencias. Siempre gozo de escucharlos. Tengo una visión muy extensa de vuestro país gracias a ustedes. Recuerdo que cuando era pequeño, en mi barrio, escuela y ciudad se escuchaba una canción que hace poco me enteré que es de Rumanía y se llama Numa Numa Yei del grupo Ozone. Me siento muy feliz de saber que es de vuestro país. Es que no solo la radio nos une, sino también la música, y aunque apenas tengo 19 años, me puedo dar cuenta de que ha cambiado el tiempo y ya no llega tan buena música como la era de esos tiempos. Les agradezco que lean mi correo y discúlpenme porque me alargué demasiado, pero me ganó la inspiración. Les mando un caluroso saludo y un gran abrazo y seguiré en la escucha con profundo aprecio. Muchas gracias, Javier, por volver a colaborar con nosotros. Me alegro mucho que hayas logrado sintonizar nuestros programas en los 11.780 kHz con buen tiempo. Te agradezco asimismo todo lo compartido, un cálido mensaje que me ha emocionado bastante. A mi turno, amigo, te mando un gran abrazo y quedo a la espera de tus noticias. Hasta pronto. Alex Costa Oliveira de São Paulo, Brasil, vuelve con nuevos datos sobre sus escuchas. El primer informe es del día 3 de junio, hora UTC 19:40, frecuencia 11.000 de edad. Se trata de los días 25, 26 y 28 y 31 de mayo y luego los días 1, 2, 3, 5 de junio. Este amigo no recibió en general señal alguna en la frecuencia de 13.750 kHz, pero nos escuchó en buenas condiciones a las 21 UTC por los 11.650 kHz. Amigos, hasta aquí los informes, señala Juan Carlos, pero no quiero despedirme sin antes felicitar y agradecer por la excelente programación con que a diario nos bonifican. Aunque sea reiterativo al expresar mis conceptos, los reitero, pues la vuestra es una programación de las que más disfruto escuchar. Lo dicho, es sincero y no me canso de manifestarlo. Muchas gracias otra vez por lo que a diario nos dan. Muchas gracias a ti, Juan Carlos, por volver a proporcionarnos los datos de tus últimas escuchas y por apoyarnos incondicionalmente. A mi turno, amigo, te mando un cálido saludo en la distancia.
Están sintonizando Radio Rumanía Internacional.
Queridos oyentes, en los minutos siguientes les ofrecemos una dedicatoria musical en la interpretación de la cantante Andra. La canción se llama La Indiferencia. Que la disfruten.
Differenza dintre noi è che indifferenza la peccato.
Every day when I finish walking, understand why there's such a gap. And this is where the beginning of an idea was born. That idea was to sell made-in-China homeware goods in the U.S. market. Mary and her then-husband David set up booths at American trade fairs. Candles were what they sold the most, and they ran their business out of Maryland. Not long after, in 1997, they landed a huge contract with Target, one of America's largest retailers, thanks to an enthusiastic female wholesale buyer at the company. By 1998, May was selling $9 million worth of candles in the US, wholesale. It was all go at a company, Chesapeake Bay Candle, but it wasn't all plain sailing. In the early 2000s, the U.S. imposed anti-dumping duties on candles made in China.
Anti-dumping is really a way that countries such as U.S. protect its own domestic industry. So when they realize that the products sold by a foreign companies are so low that it destroys its domestic industry, they levy a extremely high punitive rate. So for China, the rate went to 108%, which means $1 worth of candles at the border. When you bring it, you have to pay $1.08 just for tax. That was basically detrimental to our business.
Mei Xi moved her candle manufacturing to Vietnam to dodge the duties, but costs there kept rising. It wasn't long until she made a momentous decision. She would onshore her manufacturing to America.
I think I had such a love affair with Chesapeake Bay. I said, let's bring it home. It doesn't make sense to call it Chesapeake Bay. I said, let's bring it back to Maryland. Obviously, no one told me that Maryland is a very heavy regulated state. It does not really welcome manufacturing. So when we were looking to apply for permits, the office basically looked at us and said, you know what, we haven't had any application for manufacturing for 3 decades, so we don't have one. But we have permits for hospitals and restaurants and schools. These are 3 different permits. Why don't you research them, and if you can meet all 3 of them, you're going to get a permit. So that's what we did. So it took us a long time, but eventually happened. And I have to say that at that time, not even a bank that we worked with wanted to lend us money to build that factory, because for them, it's like, how can this factory be affordable and able to give you profit when you have been shipping out of Asia?
What do you think that says about manufacturing? Because I know in your book you also talk about the attitudes to manufacturing in America compared to, say, other parts of the world.
I think there's a little bit of a, looking down upon this.
Looking down on manufacturing.
Upon manufacturing. Why should we manufacture candles and underwear when we can manufacture maybe cars or computers? Or we don't manufacture at all. We just do service. There's a little bit of, we don't need to create jobs that is working as a labor in a factory. So when I opened the factory, I remember very vividly one of the labor department officials came to stage a job training event in my factory, and she basically said to me, those jobs, manufacturing underwear, can stay in Mexico and China. We don't need them back. And I remember very sadly thinking, why do you say that? My workers listening to you would have a hard time understanding. They're happy to tell their friends and family in other cities that I made this candle at Target. Go check it out. I'm so proud of it. They're making a good living. And what's wrong with making things again?
When you look at what's happening now, for example, in China, cracking down in particular on some of its biggest and most successful entrepreneurs like Jack Ma. What do you make of that?
Jack Ma is from my home city, and he actually is also an English teacher. So there's something about those of us who's trained in English, who's exposed to foreign cultures at a much younger age, that I think may be a very important reason why some of us are becoming successful. Interestingly, I just recently found out one of the new competitors of Alibaba is called Pinduoduo. It's another website that is consumer-driven, and its founder is actually a schoolmate from Hangzhou, the same school. So I do feel maybe the underlying is that, foreign studies expose you and open your horizon, and you are truly global from the way that you look at the world. And definitely helps me.
But it is a hard time to be an Asian immigrant in the United States at the moment, isn't it?
I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a very bad incident where an Asian woman was told to move back to China because of the coronavirus or the China virus. President Trump liked to call it. Yes, as he liked to call. And many other leaders of the world that follow him also blame Asian Americans. And that anger is unprecedented.
All I have to say is that, as you know, Google's co-partner was an immigrant. Elon Musk is an immigrant. Co-founder of YouTube is an immigrant. I myself created hundreds of jobs in this country because of the factory, because of my design team. So I do feel we have made great contribution as immigrants, and this country thrives as long as stories like mine are still happening. Nishi speaking to Manuela Cerrosa. That's all from us this week with Matthew Davis producing and Mountain Weather editing. On Twitter, I'm @LindsayBertie, or on email, we're world.business@bbc.co.uk. Thanks for being with us. Goodbye. The BBC World Service. And on the inquiry this week, a diverted plane, the arrest of an opposition journalist, Russian meddling, and Europe's last dictator. This week on the inquiry, we ask, can President Lukashenko be overthrown? The inquiry at bbcworldservice.com/inquiry. The guest on Hard Talk is
Ben Rhodes, key national security advisor to Barack Obama. What came next was the Trump presidency with its tumultuous impact on America's domestic politics and foreign policy. So is Joe Biden capable of setting the US on a new course?
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Welcome to News Out on the BBC World Service. Hello, I'm James Menendez. Naftali Bennett replaces Benjamin Netanyahu as Prime Minister of Israel. We'll hear from the party behind the new and rather precarious coalition.
I think it's a life-changing moment for Israel. We're going to establish a new government that's going to be good for the Israeli people and going to be good for Jews all around the world.
G7 leaders closed their summit in England with broad promises to poorer countries with money to cope with climate change and more coronavirus vaccinations.
I know that the world was looking to us to reject some of the selfishness and nationalistic approaches and more of the initial global response to the pandemic.
And how to film a sex scene without exploiting the actor. Should all movie sets now have an intimacy coordinator? All of that and more after the news.
Hello, I'm Moira Alderson with the BBC News. The Israeli Parliament has approved a new coalition government, ousting Benjamin Netanyahu as Prime Minister after 12 years in power. After a primary session of Parliament, the new government, led for now by the right-wing Jewish nationalist Naftali Bennett, won the confidence vote by just a single vote. Yolande Now reports.
This special session of Parliament was a rowdy one. When he first took to the podium, Naftali Bennett was heckled with shouts of liar and fame by right-wing and ultra-Orthodox Jewish politicians allied to Benjamin Netanyahu. The coalition he leads is an unlikely one that spans the political spectrum from the left to the far right and includes an Arab Israeli party. Mr. Bennett said he was proud that he was working with others with different views and outlined an agenda heavy on social and economic policies. But this new government will be a fragile one, brought together primarily by the desire to unseat Mr. Netanyahu.
G7 leaders have closed a summit in England with a series of promises to help poorer nations tackle coronavirus and cope with climate change. The G7 said it would deliver over 1 billion coronavirus vaccinations to poorer countries and raise $100 billion to help them cut carbon emissions. For his part, President Emmanuel Macron said France would double the amount of vaccine doses it donates to 60 million this year. The Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said leaders agreed to stand strong and united to address challenges posed by China. He'll brought them report.
Go back to that old adage that the proof of the pudding is in the eating, because if you sort of strip away everything else, what you have here were some pretty bold commitments on vaccinations. Going to vaccinate everyone in the world by the end of next year. And on climate change, yes, we're going to meet our commitments on funding fighting climate change. So you know what's coming next. Let's see what they do.
President Biden has hailed what he called an extraordinarily collaborative and productive summit. He said he had felt a genuine sense of enthusiasm for America being engaged diplomatically once again. In security, President Biden called NATO's mutual defense a sacred obligation. Swiss voters have narrowly rejected government proposals to limit carbon dioxide emissions. Voters have also rejected proposals to limit synthetic pesticides emitting soap.
The no to limiting CO2 emissions is a huge shock. The Swiss government drafted this law carefully. Rejection undermines Switzerland's entire strategy to comply with the Paris Agreement on climate change. The no to the proposals on pesticides is not quite so unexpected. People's powerful farming lobby argued farmers would go out of business and food prices would rise. But today's results are a devastating blow for environmentalists. Meanwhile, Switzerland is falling behind its European neighbours in efforts to tackle climate change. BBC News. Tens of thousands of protesters turned out in Madrid to insist that Spain's government does not go ahead with plans to pardon 9 jailed Catalan separatists. Right-wing parties backed the demonstration. They accused the minority socialist-led government of pursuing the plan to shore up political support at a national level with groups that seek to undermine Spanish unity and sovereignty. Police in Nicaragua have arrested and detained 4 female members of the opposition Unimos party under the country's new treason law. The detainees include a former minister of the Sandinista Nacional Front, Dora Calles. 11 government opponents have been arrested so far in the last few weeks by the administration of Daniel Ortega. Others already under detention include 4 presidential hopefuls who plan to stand against President Ortega in the elections in November. The Serbian tennis player Novak Djokovic has won his 19th Grand Slam title after fighting back from 2 sets down to beat Greece's Stefanos Tsitsipas in the French Open. Djokovic was in deep trouble before winning the last 3 sets. The victory moves Djokovic to a major title behind the men's record, jointly held by Switzerland's Roger Federer and Spain's Rafael Nadal. He beat Nadal in a hard-fought semi-final, which has been hailed as a classic. He spoke about his victories against Nadal and Tsitsipas.
Unforgettable matches, unforgettable moments for me, for my career, for my life. Definitely remember these last 48 hours for the rest of my life.
The Netherlands and Ukraine are facing off in the European Championship. The match in Amsterdam is the first time the 2 teams have met at a major football tournament. Earlier, Austria bore off a spirited challenge from North Macedonia to win 3-1. Before that, England got their campaign underway with a 1-0 victory over Croatia at Wembley. BBC News.
And welcome to News Hour from the BBC World Service. We're coming to you live from London. I'm James Menendez. In a minute, the end of an era in Israeli politics. We'll hear about the new coalition government in Israel and the challenge it has in sticking together. Also, as the G7 meeting in Cornwall wraps up, how did leaders respond to this message from the British naturalist and broadcaster, Sir David Attenborough?
Climate change is a threat to global security and can only be dealt by unparalleled levels of global cooperation. Through global cooperation, we may achieve far more than tackling climate change. We may finally create a stable, healthy world. Our resources are equally shared.
And we'll have a story about Judy Garland that will make you see her in a very different light. That's coming up in just over half an hour's time. But let's start in Israel.
אני, נפתלי בנט, ידידי יעקב, זכרו לברכה.
Israel's new Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett of the religious nationalist Yamina party, been sworn in just a couple of hours ago. The lead of a governing coalition of wildly disparate parties, from the right, the centre, the left, and from a conservative Arab Israeli party that all came together with one Netanyahu's 12-year run as premier. The vote of confidence was held in the parliamentary Knesset, and in the end, that new coalition was confirmed with a razor-thin majority of just 60 to 59. Mr. Bennett will be Prime Minister for 2 years before handing over to Yair Lapid of the centrist Yesh Atid party that won the most opposition seats in March's election. But Mr. Bennett tried to address the parliament. He was repeatedly huckled.
אני ראש הממשלה,
The Speaker of the Israeli Knesset trying to maintain a degree of order. Well, as for the outgoing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he had this message for his foes and allies.
אני שמעתי את בני, לצערי אין לו את המעמד הבינלאומי.
Regrettably, I listened to Bennett. Regrettably, he doesn't possess the international standing. He doesn't possess the credibility. He doesn't have the capability. He doesn't have the knowledge. And above all, he has not the government nor the words that will allow him to truly object to the nuclear deal. The Prime Minister of Israel must be capable of saying no to the United States President on matters that endanger our existence. So I have a message to those who are joyful in Iran and to those who also stay in Hezbollah and in Hamas. We'll reflect on Mr. Netanyahu's political career a little later in the programme. Looking at the new party, the largest party in the new government, Ron Katz is a new member of the Knesset, and I spoke to him before the final vote. What does today mean for Israel?
I think it's a life-changing moment for Israel. We're going to establish a new government that's going to be good for the Israeli people and going to be good for Jews all around the world.
What will the government stand for? It is such a disparate coalition of parties. What does it stand for beyond the desire to get rid of Mr. Netanyahu?
Hope and the search for a better life in Israel. And when we all unite to this idea, to this motion, everything is possible.
But what's the basis going to be? I mean, you've got your party, you've got the far right, you've got the left, you've got an Arab party. I mean, what do any of these parties have in common?
We all want a better life for the Israeli people. We all know that the Israeli people need a good government now after a difficult year and difficult period of time. Government is for the Israeli people. And when you put aside all the issues and focus on what you want to do good for the country, I think it's going to succeed.
Why did your leader, Yair Lapid, not want to be Prime Minister and give that opportunity to Naftali Bennett? That doesn't make any sense to me.
He's going to be a Prime Minister, he's going to be a great Prime Minister, but, you know, when you have to do coalition with a lot of partners, you need to give away something, and this is one of the things, but Yair Lapid is going to be a great Prime Minister in
Mr. Netanyahu, wasn't he?
Yeah, just the next Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett. And I think it's going to be a good partner for us, and it's going to be a good Prime Minister for the country. And we have more things that we agree.
What does it mean in terms of, let's just talk about relations with the Palestinians. I mean, will this government still favour a two-state solution?
This government will need to work together to think about this kind of situation, but we think we're going to find a way to do it.
Well, settlement expansion, for example.
Again, it's going to be a complex government. We're going to find a way to agree on everything that we need to agree about.
I don't want to be cynical about it, but I mean, I just can't see that, you know, you set any common ground with the next Prime Minister and his party. And, I mean, how long is this government going to last? Isn't it just going to fall apart in a few weeks?
This government is going to last because we agree on economic, and we agree about what the people in Israel need for the government, and we agree on a lot of stuff. Of course, we don't agree on anything, like everything in life, but we committed to the people in Israel, and I'm a big believer in that it is good.
I mean, relations with the Palestinians is a big issue, of course, and I just wonder, you know, what's your vision for Israel and its relations with something that Naftali Bennett believes in, is it?
I think that this is one of the issues, the big issue that we need to discuss, and we need to find a compromise that will work for everyone, and I think we can do it. I'm sure that if we can do magic for the Israeli people, and I think we're going to find a way to work together, it's going to be great.
So you think how long is this government going to last? Let's just get this on record now. Is this going to last the full term?
To the end, yes.
Okay, and if it doesn't, can we talk to you then? We'll talk to you in a few weeks. And when it does,
I hope you're going to talk to me soon because it's going to be a few years. So how are you going to talk to me first?
I just need to ask you about one pressing issue that's going to come up very soon, and of course this is this controversial march by far-right nationalists that's caused all sorts of problems, as we know, in the past few weeks. The police have now given it permission. It's due to go ahead through the Old City on Tuesday. What should that decision stand, do you think?
I think though the people of Israel can go whatever they think that they want to go with the Israeli flag. Of course they don't need to cause trouble to other civilians, but we need to find a way to make sure that it's going to be safe and it's going to be peaceful.
But it's not just about whether it's safe and peaceful, it's incredibly provocative, isn't it, for Palestinians? And we've just had a conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. You're not worried that that violence is going to flare up again?
I think that some people were very eager to do it before the government meet up. And it is going to be a peaceful walk.
The largest party in the new coalition, Yesh Atid. Well, let's talk to Milan, our Middle East correspondent from Jerusalem. Milan, how big a moment, first of all, is this in Israeli politics, do you think?
It's a huge moment in Israeli politics. First because, as we've been saying, it brings an end to this 12-year stretch in power for Benjamin Netanyahu. He is such a dominant politician. He's really defined this generation in Israeli politics. Also, it's important because we have the most unlikely coalition, it's the most broad-based coalition that Israel has ever seen, with this whole political spectrum represented from the far right, where Naftali Bennett is situated, through the centre parties, right across to the left, and also including this is the first time that a government is going to rely on the support of an independent Arab Israeli party.
I mean, do they have any common ground at all? Aside from wanting to get rid of Benjamin Netanyahu, and I guess that's happening now.
Well, they have been desperately trying to say that there are areas on which they can agree, and doing what sound reasonable and mature, respectful to each other. They talked mainly about social and economic issues as they laid out their policies. Those are areas where probably consensus can be found. They want, in particular, to end the political stalemate that led to these 4 elections in 2 years, and has also led to things like there being no budget stabilising the country's finances. They talked a lot about other domestic issues on housing and infrastructure, and also, interestingly, about limitations on the Prime Minister's term in office to 2 terms or 8 years. I think there will be the status quo on lots of things when it comes to religion and state, because those issues are just too sensitive for such a diverse group to sort out. In other areas where things are, really ideologically different, particularly on the Israel-Palestinian conflict, I think we're just going to see a continuation of managing the conflict, not really solving it. I don't think there are going to be any very surprising new policies, no major concessions to the Palestinians, and what probably means that annexation of a large part of the West Bank is off the table for now. Naftali Bennett has supported that in the past, but he would not have the support to pass that through. We know too, of course, the Biden administration is pushing for restraint. Another interesting area would be when it comes to Iran. We're expecting Benjamin Netanyahu's hardline position and opposition to Joe Biden's nuclear deal revival efforts to stay in place, or Yair Lapid as foreign minister, because that's how they'll serve first of all to head off to Washington quite soon. But Benjamin Netanyahu really focused in on this when he was speaking defiantly in the Israeli parliament earlier, talking about how this new government will be weak and unable to stand up to the US, he said. He said there will be celebrations in Iran today because of this new government taking over. He, of course, has really capitalized on his reputation as Israel's Minister of Security.
He also spoke about the fact that he'll be back. What are his chances of a return?
He still remains the leader of the biggest party in the Israeli parliament. He controls a quarter of the seats for the Quds party, and yes, you have to take it very seriously. He remains a dominant force in Israeli politics. He has said that he wants to return, and I think that will be what he's working towards. There are things going on. faces a trial. He's on trial for corruption. He denies any wrongdoing, says this has been a political witch hunt. He'll be weaker trying to fight that battle while he's in opposition.
Yolande, thank you very much indeed. The BBC's Yolande now, our Middle East correspondent, joining us now from Jerusalem. We will be returning, as I mentioned, to this story, looking at Mr. Netanyahu's political legacy in just over 10 minutes' time. You're listening to News. Also still to come on the programme, we'll be looking at the work of what are known as intimacy coordinators in the film and TV industry, highlighted by the British actor Michaela Cole this week.
Thank you for your existence in our industry, for making the space safe, for creating physical, emotional and professional boundaries. I know what it's like to shoot without an intimacy director, the messy, embarrassing feelings for the crew, the internal devastation for the actor.
And that coming up in half an hour's time. Our main headlines from the newsroom this hour. In a close vote, the Israeli Parliament's approved a new coalition government ousting Benjamin Netanyahu as Prime Minister. And due to the leaders of the summit in England with promises of coronavirus vaccinations for poorer countries and help tackling climate change, we'll be talking about that in just a moment's time. From the BBC. Those two leaders meeting in Cornwall in southwest England have closed their summit with a series of pledges to help poorer nations tackle coronavirus and combat climate change. But however, there was a shortage of detail in the final communique and a feeling among many campaigners on both issues that what was pledged didn't go far enough. Nevertheless,
Vallecas por un poco por lo inestable.
سعید جان به زبان خیلی ساده ببینید چقدر بدبخت شدیم که موضوع
ìjọba mo fẹ́ ká sọ ni o káwọn ọmọ Yorùbá ó lè gbọ́ wáyé dáadáa tá a bá ń pariwo ìjọba ǹjẹ́ ọ̀kọ̀ọ̀kan máa wá.
رسائل كرونسوس الأول والثاني الثلاث رسائل دي يجمع كل الملحدين.
Cette notion d'immortalité de l'âme.
During the political rallies, the goodness of those political rallies that they provide security for the members of attack are quite high. Otherwise, in this case, actually, what the church would call for would be political parties to tolerate one another.
I will be a manager too, same as him. Trust me. Someday I will take you out of this building. Crois-moi.
See you tomorrow. Can you make it to your room by yourself?
Yes.
Bye.
I can smell the alcohol from you in here.
Avon, you know what? I am really joyful today. I will be a general manager soon. Huh? Come on, clap your hands for me.
Congratulations. On the other hand, my job is still nowhere to be found. I felt being out of a job is more tiring than working. Every day, I read my watch and pretend to be off work and dine with the two moms. It happens they're competing by their sons. What a bad time for me to lose my job.
Where's Dabao?
Fontaine en tête de liste, qu'il considère comme étant le plus beau. Voilà, donc ce n'est pas un classement.
Сначала называть фамилию, а потом имя. Китайское имя обычно состоит из одного или двух иероглифов, но иногда встречаются имена из 3 иероглифов.
多财物，你还会接受他们的关制，并与他结为。
그거 중에서 이제 미스커뮤니케이션, 그러니까 서로 소통상에 장애가 있었던 것 같아요. 얘기를 한 것 같은데요?
그렇습니다. 앞에도 뭐 잠시 이제 나왔고.
故事呢？
我们在这边的教学呢，基本上是通过几个方面。
It's just some silly drunk talk. I can't be more serious. I'm not drunk at all. I know you.
The voting aimed at opening up the Start County. And so
会用谚语，就中国很多有趣的谚语的故事，我们。
And take control of your life. Arise, the workers from your slumbers. Arise.
Como artri, kay kwartek 1,01 metray. Ni pong medikas pin.
2.5 meters above the ground. Down part with the feeding point, but I'm using the balloon 4x1, and it is my question. But I see on your QRZ page you scratch matching FG F59 75 ohms. That means your antenna has 120 ohms, and you use the for the tuning the coax cable.
And my antenna is a rotary dipole. This antenna is about 18 meters over the ground. This is what I have here in city in Stuttgart. And your signal is also 10 dB over is 9 volts. Germany 4, X-ray Sierra Bravo, Delta Kilowatt 1, radio uniform. Go ahead.
Delta Kilo 1, radio uniform. Germany 4, X-ray Sierra Bravo, returning go. Roll up. Okay, we have frequency will be in the 5,000. I also have a 5,000. At the moment I'm running on the Icon 7610 along with the higher headset Pro 7. We know it, as well.
Yeah, Sugar Peter 9, Sugar Lima, DJ 9 UN. The antenna is a monoband antenna, so it's only 40 meters. Guess this is the answer on the first question. And that the matching is done by a coax cable, RG59, so it's a big coax cable, 75 ohms, a quarter wave on 40 meter, which gives you approximately, so you just need to cut a piece of coax, 6.85, it is 6.85 or
anderer Musikgenres enthalten. Jetzt kommt das Lied Moonshot von der Band And Flying.
Vorgehst du auf die 8 gemacht werden, also da waren tolle Bedingungen. Ich habe eine Meergeschichte, war so 40 Meter gut, ne? Da bin ich auf 15 Meter, du, da habe ich also... Guarda, děkuji, dobrý noci, hej. Witam na stacji. Ma reflektometr. Zjeżdża mocą na 5 W albo na 10 W i tymi dwoma przyciskami albo tymi dwoma
Nein, du kannst ganz normal buffetmäßig da essen, ne? Deswegen, das war wichtig.
Ja, dann kannst du auch selbst nachholen, natürlich.
Ja, klar, der Preis ist zwar ein bisschen teurer, aber einfach lecker.
Instead of the help of communist China,
he planned to contaminate it by detonating a dirty bomb in the vaults and thus effectively remove the gold from international circulation.
It's an inspired deal. They get what they want, economic chaos in the West, and the value of your gold increases many times. Brilliant.
But why would irradiating the world's biggest gold reserves plunge economies into turmoil? The answer is that almost every Western country was signed up to the 1944 Bretton Woods Agreement. And at the heart of that agreement was a commitment by the United States to convert dollars into gold on demand. So much for Ian Fleming's spy fiction. Real life was nearly as dramatic.
Good evening.
50 years ago this summer, the US President Richard Nixon took to the airwaves.
America today has the best opportunity in this century to achieve two of its greatest ideals: to bring about a full generation of peace and to create a new prosperity without war.
In his address to the nation that August evening, Nixon unleashed his inner Goldfinger. In an attempt to shore up the inflation-scarred US economy, he unilaterally ripped up Bretton Woods. Instead of tying the US dollar to gold, Nixon made it into what's called a fiat currency. Unlike a gold-pegged currency, a fiat currency has no intrinsic value. The rest of the world, the amount of currency in circulation at any given moment can be freely determined by the government and its central bank, which comes in handy when something really bad happens, like this.
It was a manic Monday in the financial markets. The Dow tumbled more than 500 points after two pillars of the street tumbled over the weekend, brought down by bad mortgage investments. Lehman, which has 25,000...
In 2008, the world economy was hit by the most serious financial crisis since the 1930s Great Depression. The response of central banks was something called quantitative easing.
Quantitative easing is one of these PhD-approved euphemisms. Doesn't really convey the essential point. Money printing.
This amounted to printing money to help sustain the domestic financial system and support broader economic activity. Then, early last year, another almighty shock.
Unwelcome but expected, the coronavirus has hit the UK. It's inside this hospital in Newcastle, where 2 patients from the same family are now in isolation.
The economic slump caused by COVID has made 2008 look like a trial run in central bank money creation. Almost a fifth of all US dollars in existence were created over the past year. On the face of it, the medicine seems to have worked. But there's been some strange side effects.
Can we get much higher? Can anything slow down the surge we have seen in Bitcoin? Well, Kate Rooney, another record high this morning. She's going to break that down for us.
As the supply of fiat money has soared all around the globe, people are increasingly seeing value in other places, especially online.
It feels like crypto is close to ready for the mainstream in a way that it wasn't even 4 years ago.
So-called cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin have been hitting record highs.
So what is Dogecoin?
About as real as that dollar.
The social media leviathan Facebook is designing its own online tender.
I actually don't know if Libra is going to work, but I believe that it's important to try new things.
And in response, central banks all around the world are exploring setting up their own new digital currencies.
People have to understand that this is a dice roll.
Everything seems to be in flux. So what's going on with money?
We've got a lot of things that are happening that to the average person and maybe even to people who've been market practitioners for a long time look pretty crazy.
I think we're about to undergo the most profound change that any of us have ever lived through, and that's the transformation of value to the digital world.
In this digital world, who decides what has value? Is it our governments? Is it a tech billionaire like Elon Musk, who's been blowing hot and cold on Bitcoin and also another cryptocurrency called Dogecoin? And in this upside-down world of funny money, is there a generational chasm opening up over our attitude to dosh? My name's Ben Chu. I'm the economics editor of Newsnight, and in this edition of Analysis, I'm looking for answers to these questions. I started by speaking to a young person who's prospered in this new world.
Perhaps you could start with you just pronouncing your name so we've got it on the record.
Sure, so it's Daniel Magod.
And you're 30 years old, is that still right?
Correct, yes.
Okay, Daniel, let's kick off. How did you first hear about Bitcoin? Daniel is now a full-time crypto investor based in Brisbane, Australia.
In 2013, I was at university at the time studying psychology, and as any university student, I was procrastinating on my assignment, and I actually came across a BBC article about Bitcoin and how it had just risen from $15 to $30, and that piqued my interest, and I started to dive down the whole, cryptocurrency rabbit hole.
It's been a profitable rabbit hole.
I started with about $3,000 to $4,000, and it's now sitting at around $15 million.
So how do you feel when looking back at that ride you've had?
Yeah, it's been incredible, to be honest. I never pictured this for myself when I, first invested in Bitcoin. I never thought it would change my life. I still remember my grandma thinking that I had somehow made all of this money from drugs, she was a little bit worried about me. And then I think it was not until years later, until quite recently actually, when they actually started to realize that what I was doing, that I was actually quite talented and how I've been earning a living over all of these years.
Stop. Before you rush into Bitcoin, this is not investment advice. Not everyone who's put money into cryptocurrencies has seen those sort of returns, or should expect to see them. Yet for many, the attraction of Bitcoin is not just the promise of profits, but the potential for a new system of money. No government controls Bitcoin, and the blockchain technology that underpins it holds out the possibility of cutting out traditional commercial banks and even central banks from the transaction process. The scarcity of the tokens, unlike fiat currencies which can be created in unlimited quantities, is another big selling point for some users.
I like the thought that there is only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoins. Owning just one Bitcoin means that you've got 1 in 21 million. So that's, what I used to tell my friends when I first invested in Bitcoin back in 2013, was that buying one right now for $200 seems incredibly cheap.
So, 21 million Bitcoins maximum. Is that what gives Bitcoin its value?
Yes, so the value proposition comes from Bitcoin in two ways. One is the digital scarcity that is impossible to change. So that makes it a very, very interesting asset.
This is Raoul Powell, a former hedge fund manager turned cryptocurrency investor and consultant.
The next thing you need to have is network effects. You need to have people who want to own that particular asset, and you need a large number of people to use it. So this was the system of, it can be used as money, it can be thought of as a store of value, and you can build other applications on top of it, such as payment systems. So now you have a system that has value for a number of different participants in different ways. Even the mining ecosystem of Bitcoin gives another group of people a value proposition. So once you put all of those together, you create network effects around this digital scarcity, and that gives Bitcoin its explosive value that we've seen so far.
Because of that inbuilt scarcity, a feature of the computer code that designed it, some people have described Bitcoin as digital gold.
Well, I think it's fool's gold.
This is gold investor and financial commentator Peter Schiff.
It's digital for sure, but it's not gold. I mean, it's no more gold than a digital food would be food. I mean, I could have a digital apple, but I can't eat it. It's not going to provide me with any kind of nourishment. I mean, it could look like an apple on a computer screen. All it is a digital string of numbers. It doesn't possess any of the properties that made gold money. The reason gold is a store of value is because you're storing the value of the metal, all the things that you could do with the metal. But when you store Bitcoin, you're not storing anything. There is no jewelry industry that needs Bitcoin. There is no computer industry that needs Bitcoin. There's no dental industry that needs Bitcoin. Now, you can give Bitcoin to somebody else. They'll buy it from you right now because there's a market, but that's true for anything. If people are willing to buy something, then it'll have a price. So what Bitcoin has is a price. It doesn't have any underlying value. That's an old Warren Buffett quote. Price is what you pay, value is what you get.
Peter thinks the future of money actually lies not in cryptocurrencies, but in its tried and tested past.
And do you think it's possible we could go back to a gold standard for money?
Well, I think it's kind of inevitable that we're going to do that. I mean, the history of the world is the gold standard. We've only deviated from it for short periods of time, and it always ends in disaster. I think a monetary crisis is coming. I think a dollar crisis is coming. And I don't know how you solve that without going back to a gold standard.
So in this view of the world, money is money because it's backed by something that has a real world value like gold. Money, in the end, has to have an intrinsic value, right? Wrong, says economist Pavlina Cherneva. She points to the historical origins of money to make her point.
Conventional story goes that we typically settled on shiny objects because for some reason they had some intrinsic value. Then the minting of coin began. Now the trouble with this story is that that's the story that only economists tell. That archaeologists, anthropologists, sociologists, no one else tells this story because they cannot find any evidence of the origin of money from barter. Money predates coinage by thousands of years. We see clay tablets. They don't have any obvious intrinsic value, yet those are the very first forms of money that we discover. We find cocoa leaves. We find cowrie shells. We find money on ledgers that don't have physical representation, like the debens in Egypt, that were just the name that represented a certain amount of bushels of wheat or barley or whatever. In other words, there are many different kinds of financial instruments, monies, if you will, throughout history that have dominated different societies, and we must have an explanation for that. If they didn't have an obvious intrinsic value, why did those societies adopt them?
So money doesn't have to be backed by precious metals. But does the system work better when it is, as Peter claims? Some economists argue that's the opposite of the truth.
There's a reason that countries went off of the gold standard and back on and then off and then back on and then off for good.
Stephanie Kelton is an economist and former advisor to presidential hopeful Bernie Sanders.
We went off the gold standard in World War I, reintroduced the gold standard in the so-called interwar years, and then when World War II happened, we went off the gold standard again. And why do countries go off the gold standard? They do it because they need the flexibility to step up spending, especially in times of crisis. What if we had been on a gold standard and coronavirus hit? We absolutely would have suspended the gold standard. You can't have a monetary system that constrains the government's ability to act when it needs to act on behalf of the people, especially in a crisis situation. So, yes, you want maximum flexibility in the monetary system to achieve macroeconomic goals like full employment and price stability.
Stephanie is a figurehead of the increasingly influential Modern Monetary Theory movement, or MMT. MMT argues that governments can and should be much bolder in using both government spending and money printing to ensure a strong economy, unconstrained by traditional fears about the size of the government debt and the money supply. And for the MMT school, the value of a currency in a modern nation state really derives from its political authorities, from governments.
So when you say a currency, I think of a currency issued by a state. So the Japanese yen, the US dollar, the British pound. Those currencies, I would argue, achieve value, derive their value from primarily the fact that the government accepts its own currency back in payment to itself, and it requires, in a sense, that the rest of us use that currency, and it does that by making and enforcing tax laws that say to the rest of us, basically, that we've got to find a way to earn the state's currency in order to settle our obligations to the state.
By the way, those central bank digital currencies you've been hearing about, they're simply fresh versions of regular state money. Old wine in new digital bottles, if you like. And one of the big reasons they're developing them is to retain state control of the monetary system. But let's take stock. State money doesn't need to be backed by precious metals, and it gets value from the requirement of governments that we have to pay our taxes in them. But can other forms of money exist alongside the main government-issued currencies? The financial historian Neil Ferguson argues anything can, in fact, be money.
Back in 2008, I published a book called The Ascent of Money, which offered an answer to that question. And the answer is that really money is anything that a debtor and a creditor can agree to represent the transaction, the debt between them. It's clear from the history of money that you don't require the state's imprimatur for something to be money.
Neil Ferguson!
Stephen Colbert asked me on his comedy show back then, does that mean, Neil, that I can be money?
Can I eat it? Can I eat money?
No, don't try
Can I eat money? Can I have sex with it?
No, don't try that either.
Can I be money? Am I money? Am I money?
And my answer was, well, yes, anything can be money. Most money today doesn't really exist in a physical form at all. It's just an entry on your screen, a little bit of code that says that you have X pounds in your bank account. So money is a funny thing. It's not, by and large, very well understood because most people want it to be a physical thing. And yet, in reality, banknotes are a quite small part of the money supply these days and shrinking.
Is it going too far to say that money is effectively a form of collective and shared belief in something?
The word credit has its origins in the Latin credo, I believe, and ultimately what binds together a creditor and a debtor is a shared faith that the debt will be settled at the agreed point in time. That's a really important point because ultimately prices are stable if there is collective faith in the stability of the currency. When that starts to be eroded, when people start to doubt that a pound will purchase roughly the same amount of stuff a year from now as today, you get the phenomenon of an inflation spiral. And inflation can rise quite rapidly if faith in the monetary system is eroded. And this has happened multiple times throughout history.
So, we might have to let certain businesses fail. What? We can't let businesses fail. We've got vested interests to the money machine. Fellas.
Rampant inflation has not been a serious problem in most developed countries for 40 years. But some fear that could change post-pandemic, thanks to copious money printing by central banks during the crisis.
It's a magic trick I think you'll really love. Take all your money, cut half of it up. The government pulls another caper. Soon your dollar's toilet paper. Money. Yo, man, print money. The number's going down. Print money. It's not supposed to happen.
Is it perhaps a fear of state currency debasement that's driving people to store their wealth, not just in cryptocurrencies, but also in strange new digital forms of wealth known as non-fungible tokens, or NFTs?
The Christie's auction for digital artist Beeple coming to a close a few moments ago. The final bid, $69 million.
Oh my gosh.
As of
Carl, help me understand. Help me. I'm relying on you and Morgan to explain this to me.
In March, the artist Mike Winkleman, who works under the name of Beeple, sold a collection of his work at auction for $69 million.
69 million? I think it probably means digital artists here to stay. I'm going to Disney World!
But here's the interesting thing. He didn't auction the physical art itself. The works are all digital and online only, and anyone can look at it. He didn't even sell the rights to reproduce the art or the original digital files. What he successfully sold was the purely nominal ownership of the works. This is the non-fungible token. Some argue the internet changes everything, not only when it comes to money, but to value itself.
I think we're about to undergo the most profound change that any of us have ever lived through.
Digital investor Raoul Pal again.
And that's the transformation of value to the digital world. Now that sounds kind of like a very philosophical thing, but it's very real. Literally everything that changes hands that has a value, whether it's IP rights, insurance contracts, to the value of communities, to music, to money itself, all of that is now being layered onto the internet, into this kind of internet of value. It's going to be a total revolution in the way that we extract value, both as individuals, as corporations, as communities. It kind of changes everything, and it's quite hard to get your head around initially.
If you're listening at home and thinking, this all sounds like funny money business to me, it might be a generational thing.
Generationally, it's always going to be a problem, because you kind of know what you know. I've been through everything from the fax machine to email, and they're all new, and the internet itself. And you have to learn how to do it. And then came the mobile phone revolution. I've seen my parents go through it. So everybody has to go through that, but it always does start with the younger people. They're digitally native. They grew up that way. Friends of mine, kids, they socialize on Fortnite with friends around the world. And in that world, things have value. A digital expression of yourself has value online. Because online, there's 3.5 billion people in the gaming world. But that sounds like this kind of weird dystopian world, but everything is moving into this digital realm. It's only because we can't see it yet that we don't understand it. Right now, it takes an effort to live in that world. But soon I can transfer a payment to my mother instantaneously, and she'll just download an app. She'll have no idea that this is based on blockchain technology, for example. But yes, the revolution starts with the young.
Peter Schiff's son certainly isn't a chip off the old block when it comes to views on gold and Bitcoin. I saw you gave an interview in which you said your son was quite into Bitcoin at the moment. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, he's got everything he's got in it. Now, of course, he's only 18 years old, but he has a lot more money than I had when I was 18. But he's got it all in Bitcoin. He doesn't have anything else. This is my own son. If I couldn't persuade him that this is a bunch of nonsense, imagine how difficult it is for, other parents to talk their kids out of it. So if my own son can be so drunk on the Bitcoin Kool-Aid, a lot of people could be making the same mistake, and they are making the same mistake.
In 2019, Neil Ferguson published an updated edition of The Ascent of Money with a new chapter on Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. His son's input was vital.
Certainly my education with respect to Bitcoin, which happened a few years ago now, originated with one of my sons, who was then, I think, 15 or 16, maybe even 14, who said to me quite early in the history of Bitcoin, because he's now 22, but back then he said, "Hey Dad, you should really take an interest in this amazing new thing called Bitcoin." And I was very much the lofty know-it-all professor. I said, "Well, my dear young man, I can assure you that this kind of money can possibly have any durable future, because if it were to become too successful, governments would shut it down." And this was a quite stupid assessment on my part. I should have listened to him. If I had done, I could have made really quite a lot of money, because at that time the price of Bitcoin was really quite low. I would agree that if you want to understand cryptocurrency broadly speaking, you should talk to younger people and avoid professors in their 50s and 60s. Their track record on this issue has been poor, and I've got better the more time I've spent talking not only to my son Lachlan, but to others in his generation.
So if the smart money is on the young, what are they investing in now? Remember Daniel Maygard, our young Australian crypto trader who turned $3,000 to $4,000 into $15 million. He's been investing heavily in non-fungible tokens for artworks and thinks that's just the beginning of a whole new economy.
I think a lot of people are focusing on the different aspects of NFTs, the art side of things, the collectibles. I just saw someone purchased a house design on Super Rare. But the thing is, all of that ties into the metaverse. I think the metaverse is going to be that culmination of just everything. So you'll be able to display your digital art in your digital apartment. You're going to have digital clothing, which you've been able to purchase from Gucci. Basically anything that was possible in the real world is just going to get transferred into the metaverse, and there's going to be new economies springing up all over the place.
It feels a long way from shiny metals hoarded in bank vaults. But can it be true? Or is it just a digital bubble that will soon burst? It might sound ridiculously postmodern, but if we look at history, we do see a pattern. Money is ultimately based on collective beliefs. Whether that's a belief in the intrinsic and enduring value of gold as a metal, or a belief in the power and longevity of a government which issues a paper IOU, or a belief that a private bank will look after your savings. Now, not all of those beliefs will prove to be well-founded. Just because many people believe in the long-term value of something like Bitcoin or Dogecoin or an NFT today doesn't guarantee they will believe in it tomorrow. So what will stay and what will go? Neil Ferguson again.
It's like trying to predict evolution. One of the difficult things about one of these periods of rapid financial innovation is that lots of weird species come into existence, and it's a little hard to be sure which the winners will be in evolutionary terms.
What we can say is that it seems pretty unlikely that nation-state money, the dollar and the pound, etc., are going to disappear or be eclipsed by something as volatile, scarce, and indeed inefficient as a payment method as Bitcoin, at least while those nation-states endure. But could new, weird and wonderful digital forms of money and assets survive alongside them? Well, what do you believe? And perhaps more importantly, what do you believe everyone else believes?
Analysis was presented by Ben Chu and produced by Craig Templeton-Smith.
It's regarded by critics and musicians as one of the greatest albums of all time.
I remember that first time listening, it was just so hypnotizing.
Listening to Blue is listening to someone's spirit.
Celebrating Joni Mitchell's Blue, 50 years on.
At the time that it was recorded, I couldn't look at people without weeping.
With contributions from Beth Orton, Emily Sandé, and Seal.
Her voice is such a complete instrument.
Laura Marlin presents Blue, Pain and Pleasure.
I was just dripping in earnestness and sincerity.
On Thursday morning at 11:30 on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds.
Caroline Quinn is standing by to bring us the Westminster Hour very shortly, but first a quick look at the weather. It was very warm today. Tomorrow will be cooler for many, although it will remain very warm in the southeast of England. Southern areas will be largely dry with some sunshine, but the north will be cloudier with scattered showers in northern and western Scotland. There's more warmth on the menu for England and Wales on Tuesday, but thunderstorms are on the horizon come the middle of the week. And of course there's a comprehensive weather report and forecast after the midnight news. This is Radio 4.
It's 10 o'clock. Welcome to 60 Minutes of News and Conversation with me, Caroline Quinn, and my guests. This is the Westminster Hour. The main news tonight, Boris Johnson has denied that the G7 summit has been dominated by rows about Brexit, but the Foreign Secretary has accused some EU leaders of being offensive by treating Northern Ireland as a separate country to the UK. The government will hold further meetings before announcing tomorrow if it will delay the easing of final coronavirus restrictions in England. The Israeli parliament has approved a new coalition government, ousting Benjamin Netanyahu as Prime Minister after 12 years. Coming up after the G7 sunshine, are there storm clouds ahead with tensions over Brexit and big decisions over COVID restrictions? Well, I'll be talking about that with my guests, the diplomat and former National Security Advisor Lord Ricketts, the former Cabinet Minister Damien Green, and Labour's Dame Diana Johnson. Kate Proctor, political editor of Politics Home and the House magazine, is our expert guide to the week ahead at Westminster. David Cameron might face tighter rules in future.
It doesn't matter whether it's in a formal meeting or at a dinner or it's on WhatsApp. It's the fact of lobbying and the pressure being brought that needs to be visible.
Much more from Lord Evans and all my guests after the news, read for us this evening by Chris Aldridge.
The Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab has accused some EU leaders of regarding Northern Ireland as a separate country to the UK. He told the BBC's Andrew Marr show this was offensive. French officials have rejected reports that during the G7 summit in Cornwall, President Macron told Boris Johnson Northern Ireland was not part of the UK. They said he was referring to it being across the Irish Sea. Speaking at the end of the summit, Boris Johnson played down the row, but the rift over post-Brexit reports from Cornwall.
Boris Johnson says protecting the territorial integrity of the United Kingdom is what's motivating his actions when it comes to the Northern Ireland Protocol. At this summit, European leaders warned him he must stick to the Brexit deal he signed, which requires trade checks across the Irish Sea. But that's proving disruptive and divisive, say ministers, who are also opposed to a ban on chilled meats, including sausages, crossing into Northern Ireland. In talks yesterday, Boris Johnson told the French president that it was the equivalent of preventing sausages moving from Toulouse to Paris. Emmanuel Macron reportedly said there was no comparison because those two cities were in the same country. The Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab was furious at the suggestion that Northern Ireland was not part of the United Kingdom.
I think it is offensive. We wouldn't dream of talking of northern region of Italy, the German Länder, or other provinces, particularly ones where there are these nationalist pressures. We wouldn't dream of talking about those areas in those terms. All we want is a bit of respect from the other side, a bit of flexibility, a bit of goodwill.
At his closing news conference, President Macron insisted he wasn't questioning British sovereignty, but trade rules had to be respected.
Il ne faut pas renvoyer à l'Union européenne.
One mustn't make the EU have to deal with incoherences that one was well aware of at the start. Everyone has to come back to reason. My wish is that we collectively implement what we decided on a few months ago, calmly with mutual respect. Having disagreements every morning won't help.
Having escalated the row overnight, Mr Johnson spent his news conference trying to downplay its significance. He said the subject had occupied a vanishingly small portion of deliberations. Post-Brexit tensions were already running high. The exchanges here haven't helped the search for a solution.
The G7 leaders have ended their summit by promising to supply 1 billion doses of coronavirus vaccines to poorer countries. The UK is to contribute 100 million. Boris Johnson described it as a big step towards vaccinating the world.
This summit was the first gathering of G7 leaders, in fact the first gathering of pretty much any leaders in almost 2 years. And I know that the world was looking to us to reject some of the selfishness and nationalistic approaches that have marred the initial global response to the pandemic, and to channel all our diplomatic, economic and scientific might into defeating COVID for good.
The leaders also pledged to reduce their nation's net carbon emissions to zero by 2050, to eliminate most coal power and to address challenges posed by China. Boris Johnson will hold further discussions tonight about whether or not to delay lifting some or all of England's remaining coronavirus restrictions beyond the 21st of June. A government advisor has urged caution, warning that the UK is facing a substantial third wave of infections. Here's our health correspondent, Jim Reid.
All the signs are that the Cabinet will agree to a short delay to the last phase of lockdown easing in England. It comes after one of the scientists advising the government warned the UK is facing a substantial third wave of cases driven by the Delta variant first found in India. Professor Andrew Hayward from University College London said relaxing social distancing rules further could fan the flames of the pandemic.
The way I look at it is we're driving down a road and you're coming up to a bend and you're not quite sure what's around that bend, but you think there might be something bad. You don't put your foot on the accelerator. If anything, you slow down, not speed up. I think we've got to be really cautious.
The Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, said that the decision on whether to lift restrictions would depend on how successfully the vaccine rollout had broken the link between COVID infections and hospital admissions. His thought ministers will be briefed on the latest data this evening by the government's chief scientific and medical advisors. A final decision is then likely to be taken after a meeting of senior officials tomorrow morning.
Benjamin Netanyahu has lost his 12-year hold on power after Israel's parliament voted in a new coalition government. The right-wing nationalist Naftali Bennett has been sworn in as Prime Minister, leading what he called a government of change. From Jerusalem, here's our Middle East correspondent, Yolande Nell.
This special session of Parliament was a rowdy one. When he first took to the podium, Naftali Bennett was heckled with shouts of liar and shame by right-wing and ultra-Orthodox Jewish politicians allied to Benjamin Netanyahu. The coalition he leads is an unlikely one that spans the political spectrum from the left to the far right and includes an Arab-Israeli party. Mr. Bennett said he was proud that he was working with others with different views and outlined an agenda heavy on social and economic policies. But this new government will be a fragile one, brought together primarily by the desire to unseat Mr. Netanyahu. He remains on trial for corruption, which he denies. Heading into opposition, the former leader pledged he would soon be back in power.
England's footballers have got their Euro 2020 campaign off to a promising start with a 1-0 victory against Croatia at Wembley. Our sports correspondent Natalie Perks was watching.
Before the match, the FA had implored fans to respect players' wishes to kneel for racial equality. Fans made clear they understood by drowning out a smattering of boos with applause. With temperatures exceeding 27 degrees in London, there was a party atmosphere with a crowd of 22,500 inside Wembley, the biggest since the start of the pandemic. And early on, England gave them plenty to cheer, Phil Foden hitting the post after just 5 minutes. England had never won an opening group match in the history of this competition, but it was Croatia's defenders who were the busiest. Armchair fans had criticised Gareth Southgate's team selection before the match. It was fitting then that two of the most maligned players combined beautifully for England's goal.
Phillips makes a run, he gets away from Guardiol, then he beats Chaladatar and plays it to Sterling, and Sterling through the middle forces his shot past the goalkeeper and in!
England's youthful exuberance proved too much for Croatia to handle. In the last 10 minutes, Southgate brought on Jude Bellingham at 17, now the youngest player to ever play in the European Championships. This was a composed performance that saw an unwanted record ended. England will now face Scotland here on Friday.
In the day's other matches, Austria beat North Macedonia 3-1 and the Netherlands beat Ukraine 3-2. Denmark's team doctor has confirmed that Christian Eriksen was in cardiac arrest when he collapsed during yesterday's match against Finland. The midfielder was resuscitated with a defibrillator and remains in a stable condition in hospital. In tennis, Novak Djokovic has won his 19th Grand Slam title, beating the Greek player Stefanos Tsitsipas in 5 sets to take the French Open. And England's cricketers have lost the second test against New Zealand at Edgbaston by 8 wickets. New Zealand win the series 1-0. The Queen has hosted the US President Joe Biden and the First Lady for tea at Windsor Castle. Shortly afterwards, Mr. Biden broke with tradition and shared details of their conversation with reporters. From Windsor, our royal correspondent Daniela Relf reports.
In the blazing sunshine of the quadrangle in Windsor Castle, in front of an immaculately lined-up Guard of Honour of the Queen's Company 1st Battalion, the Grenadier Guards, President Biden and Dr. Jill Biden were greeted by the Queen. It was an informal meeting with some splashes of pomp and ceremony. The President inspected the Guard of Honour, followed by a military march past. After a private tea inside Windsor Castle, the President unusually revealed some details of their conversation. He told reporters they'd had a long talk and the Queen had asked him about the presidents of Russia and China. He also said he'd invited the Queen to the White House and that she reminded him of his mother.
Daniela Relf reporting.
Thanks very much, Chris. You are listening to the Westminster Hour. Let's meet my panel this evening. Damien Green represents Ashford in Kent. He was the first Secretary of State to Theresa May as Prime Minister, her de facto deputy, and now chairs the One Nation group of Conservative MPs. Dame Diana Johnson is the Labour MP for Hull North. She's a former schools minister and known for her campaigning on behalf of those affected by contaminated blood. Peter Ricketts is a former diplomat. He was Permanent Secretary at the Foreign Office and the UK's first National Security Advisor, and now sits as a crossbench peer in the House of Lords. And Kate Proctor is here as well, political editor of the Politics Home website and the parliamentary journal, The House magazine. So a big welcome to all of you, and we have certainly got a lot to discuss this week with that big announcement on COVID restrictions. Place your bets now on how many weeks delay to the great unlock there'll be, and we'll be talking about possible future curbs on lobbying by former ministers a bit later in the programme. But let's stick first with the G7. The cavalcade may have moved on from Cornwall to Brussels for a big NATO summit there tomorrow, but there is much to pore over after the past 3 days. And Peter, if I may turn to you first of all, Peter Ricketts, as a veteran of these types of gatherings, the diplomatic niceties, the pageantry, the Queen, the helicopters, planes, barbecue, the jostling to get close to President Joe Biden, what are your reflections this evening?
And in amongst that, some substance as well. Carolyn, yes, I've been to many of these. I thought in terms of organisation, this one was a model for how to do it, actually. The location looked absolutely wonderful. The Queen and the royal family sprinkled their stardust over the invitees. It was a very good timing because this was the first time leaders had got away from Zoom and actually been together for many months. I think it'll be remembered as Joe Biden's debut as president, and also the point at which coordination between the major democracies clicked back into gear after the Trump years. And some very good outcomes on substance. I think we'll talk about it, I'm sure. Vaccines, climate change, handling China. It's, of course, crucial these are now followed up because the G7 doesn't actually have a mechanism of its own. They need to be handed off to other organisations to take forward. And then there was one issue not on the agenda, which blew up into a major row, and I thought, in pity really, that it marred the rather positive mood and left the PM caught up in a major row.
You're talking...
Sure we'll talk about that as well.
Indeed. Well, I mean, we're talking about that diplomatic row that has broken out, it seems, between the UK and France. Pretty straight talking from the British and the French side about the Northern Ireland Protocol. Are you surprised that it's so public?
I was surprised and disappointed, actually. I mean, of course, both President Macron and Boris Johnson are people who don't pull their punches in public. But this Northern Ireland issue had been an argument going on between negotiators. Now it's blown up into a very public row between two heads of government. I thought this was a missed opportunity because there's so much goodwill around that summit. And the Prime Minister could have capitalised on that, wound down the rhetoric, got Macron and Merkel together to try and create the conditions to find a solution. Instead, I'm afraid, because it's begun this row, it's probably got more difficult to sort it out. And I guess it has damaged trust between the two men.
Damien Green, do you think it's overshadowed the summit?
No, I don't. I mean, I agree with Peter that the handling of the summit, if you like, the theatrics were brilliant. The British state has been much maligned recently by various people. Actually, it shows that it can run a show as well as anyone in the world. That was very, very good. I think on the substance, they did address a lot of big issues, which I think we're going to discuss in a minute. I think it is inevitable, frankly, whenever you hold a summit, that there is going to be an issue which is already dividing people, which when you bring them together, they'll have conversations about, and therefore, in a sense, those divisions will be highlighted, not least because the entire world's media is there. But yeah, this is a real issue. I mean, there's no doubt about that. The Northern Ireland Protocol and how it's going to be implemented, and we are coming to a deadline at the end of this month when the rules will have to change from July the 1st. So I think a lot of what we're seeing is the inevitable posturing on both sides to make sure that the strength of their position is held right up until the point there's a deal.
But beyond that posturing, do you think the Foreign Secretary then seemed to stoke it, really, on the morning broadcast round? Because he said it wasn't just Monsieur Macron, but other EU leaders who were failing to understand the territorial integrity of the UK, and that Monsieur Macron's comments were offensive. I mean, that's pretty serious, isn't it?
Well, but it's quite a serious thing to say for a democracy to say about a neighbouring democracy that one part of it is sort of half in and half out of it. That's not true about Northern Ireland. It's a full part of the United Kingdom, and of course, because of all the history we know, it is a very sensitive part of the United Kingdom, and therefore other people should be more careful rather than less careful about the language they use about it.
So Diana, a more careful use of language then, because Monsieur Macron was said to have suggested that Northern Ireland was a separate country to the UK. The French clarifying this evening, saying he was referring to the fact that it's across the Irish Sea. Where do you think this leaves relations?
Well, of course, the G7 summit was all about world leadership and diplomacy, wasn't it? And it is really disappointing that actually what's been leading a lot of the news programmes today is this debate about what was said. And I do think, actually, it's unfortunate that the Foreign Secretary did stoke this up this morning on the media appearances that he made. I think everybody just needs to calm down. We all know this is a really serious issue. We know that the Prime Minister was personally involved in the negotiations around the protocol and signed up to it on behalf of the country. So I think, we have to ask why some of the other things that should have happened haven't happened, like the agreement with the EU over common food standards, which was what everybody was hoping that we would get to. So I think things need to calm down. I think we need to make sure that we can look at pragmatic ways of sorting this situation out. And I don't think this kind of tit-for-tat and spat that's gone on in the media is really helpful to anybody.
All right, we'll have a bit of a chat about maybe the pragmatic steps that could be taken, or the compromise, in just a moment. But look, we've talked about the substance, and yes, there were plenty of quite meaty topics that came out of that communique at the end. And Kate, if I can turn to you now, Boris Johnson, he gave a press conference this afternoon, didn't he? He kept trying to steer the questioners onto the agreements that had been reached by the attendees. Yeah, there's been a fantastic degree of harmony, he said. So take us through a couple of the key commitments that were made.
Well, there's three things. So commitments were made on vaccines, and we'd heard about that a little bit already, but it's this 1 billion pledge that there should be 1 billion surplus vaccines from the G7 nations going to poorer countries. Then there was commitments on the climate to basically a renewed pledge to raise $100 billion a year to help poorest countries cut their emissions. And there was also some really quite important decisions made on coal as well to try and move away from fossil fuel. And I know that activists working on that will be quite pleased with that one. And then the third one was to try and take a more unified stance against, really to try and combat one of China's initiatives, which is the One Belt, One Road expansion. This is China's investment into 70 countries around the world. And Biden is very, very keen to try and counter this with, investment from the G7 countries and to try and make sure that they're investing and doing it in a more environmentally friendly way.
Some people seem to suggest that the Americans were keener to make this an anti-China summit than perhaps the Brits would have liked.
Oh, I think that's really true, and I think Angela Merkel is quite well known for not really wanting to kind of inflame things with China. She'd rather probably not try and make a big statement on that. I'm not sure Boris Johnson is that keen on it. So this concept, it's called Build Back Better World, B3W, and it's something that Joe Biden is really keen on, but I'm really not sure whether he pulled one off there in terms of getting everyone together to sort of sing from the same hymn sheet. I mean, a lot of the criticism of this has been that what's come out of it is very vague. There's a lot of fudge, and I'd say that this is one of the most vague. I mean, there's no idea on how it would really work or the capital that's required to go into it either.
Diana, on climate change, some campaigners are already saying it doesn't go anywhere near far enough. Do you detect real action to match the warm words?
Well, just to say that £100 billion that was just mentioned about the richest countries giving to developing countries to help with climate change, that, as I understand it, has been promised for about 10 years. It's been a decade in actually arriving. So that's welcome, finally. But I do think, we're hosting COP26 in the autumn in the UK. So the climate emergency, I think, really has to be at the top of the agenda. I think that a lot of campaigners would say that we're still not doing enough. We still need to do much more, and we need to hand a hand to really many of the countries that have suffered under the pandemic and assist them more. So I am glad about the $100 billion, but much more needs to be done. And also, I was hoping that we would have some signals about what's likely to come out of COP in the autumn as well.
And on the vaccines, 1 billion doses pledged, but the head of the WHO, Dr. Tedros, of course, has been saying you need 11 billion to vaccinate the world. And Gordon Brown called it an unforgivable moral failure of these leaders not to come up with more. You've also got the argument about intellectual property rights on Western vaccines and the call for them to be waived. Do you think that is necessary?
Savoir dire, aimez-vous les plats épicés? Est-ce que tu peux m'aider?
Yes, what I would say. Yeah, definitely. And there's a huge discussion all over the world talking about, is the pandemic going to solidify the existing inequalities and gap of occupational opportunities as well as payment disparities, or can it possibly offer sort of a seismic shift of maybe addressing some of these existing issues? But so far, things are really looking particularly positive in that sense. In a way, you can argue that I think countries these days are still trying to cope with the situation instead of maybe ushering in major correctional and revolutionary measures to address some of these issues. So, but that would be a discussion for a different day. Let's just leave it there. And when we look at how employees are looking at their future, apparently there is a high percentage, a sizable majority of 77% of global respondents say that they're eager to learn new skills and to retrain and upskill. So really to beef up their toolbox to to sort of grow with the job and address these kind of challenges that they are seeing now. And for China, actually, this percentage is even higher. 89% of those living in China who've joined the survey said that, yes, they're up for learning new skills and keep up with the changing technology and workplace. But what's really interesting here, which I found, is that who's going to shoulder the cost, right? This is a key issue when we talk about retraining and reskilling the workforce. And in China, it's a higher percentage than the global average. Sort of relying on the institution, on the employers or the government, and it's not the individual or the individual's family that should be shouldering the cost, which I can kind of understand. But the global average, why? Well, I can understand why maybe this is, one could think that this is not completely something that the individual should shoulder. But when you look at different countries, it seems like some of the other countries of these employees say that they don't mind just paying for the full cost themselves. So, who should be shouldering this cost of retraining people?
I don't know. I mean, this is only my personal opinion. If I want to stay competitive in what I do, I make sure that I devote a certain percentage of my resources into educating myself, into teaching myself. I'm not sure. I mean, from my personal observation, I think people around me, they don't necessarily have that habit of investing in themselves. I mean, that I can understand, but I don't understand the logic, and that is, if you want to stay competitive, obviously you need to do something for yourself. And even if the government and the institution, the company, they provide certain resources to facilitate that need, you still need to put in the time, put in the clock to really make sure that you get something out of it.
Probably the individuals, they have to sponsor their own journey of further studies, and it's also making yourself being more prepared, in a really competitive job market. But I think also for the employers, they have to be cautious. And earlier we talked about the wave of resignation is already happening in the U.S. because when there's uncertainty, people tend to stay put. And but now in the U.S., it seems like a quarter of employees say they plan to quit their jobs. And according to a survey by Eagle Hill Consulting, because 72% of the respondents surveyed by this company saying that the pandemic caused them to rethink their skill sets. So more than half of potential job hoppers, they have sought out new training and skills during the pandemic, possibly to prepare to change jobs in the next few months. So if you are an employer and you fail to provide any new promotion opportunities for your current employees, and after they keep enriching themselves and then gain some new skills, probably it's time for them to quit a job and find a better employer in the future. That's a really positive way of looking at that situation. My interpretation could be a little bit different. It could just also be that if you kind of see other maybe possible jobs lined up along the way, or at least what's reported in the news in the U.S. these days seems to be many job openings for a lot of occupations, more in the hospitality industry than others. But if you happen to work in one of those industries that are hiring almost overnight, and then if you've got more options out there, then alongside all the soul searching and resetting your path to something that you can find more fulfillment and pay, possibly, just the job opportunities available could be a big factor there.
Well, I think it's important that people don't get overwhelmed by the wealth of opportunities being presented to them. I mean, right now in the U.S., maybe we're looking at a deluge of job offerings because of this massive infrastructure investment spending. But I'm not sure. I mean, in the U.S., especially a typical capitalist country, we talk about cycles, economic cycles. And nowadays, perhaps in the coming 1, 2, 5 years, because of the infrastructure investment, the whole economy is pretty positive, and I'm pretty happy about the current situation, and people have confidence in the outlook of the economy, that would explain the number of job offerings. But like I said earlier, I mean, everything works in cycles in a capitalist country. I mean, you got to be prepared for anything that's going to happen untowardly in the future. And again, it's really up to every individual to look out for themselves. Even if, the companies or institutions, they have that incentive to stay healthy, to make sure that their talent pool is healthy, they might have certain initiatives or plans to retrain their employees, but nothing is given. I mean, we can never anticipate what's going to happen in the future, and it's always the individuals.
Precious years, the blood and tears one shed at work for the corporation doesn't mean that much. Okay, I'm just dramatizing everything. But yes, I think, guys, let's finish this topic, wrap it up quickly with one last question. Since now maybe the companies know a little bit better into the minds of global employees, what's the first thing they should do now?
That's a fairly good question. I think,
hybrid work mode. That is something that some people certainly would really appreciate.
Yeah, maybe try and instill some kind of order after all the chaos that has been introduced by COVID-19, and maybe repair some broken bridges.
Or repair the Wi-Fi, making it faster, right? So that the Zoom calls, the emails can just go a little bit clearer and faster. We'll be back after this break. Stay tuned. How are you? What's on your mind? Let's have a heart-to-heart on Roundtable. Ask us anything. We'll help you answer it. Send a voice memo to ezfmroundtable@foxmail.com. We'll play your question on Roundtable and talk through it on the live show. Take care. We can't wait for Heart-to-Heart with you.
Looking for passion? How about fiery debate? Want to hear about current events in China from different perspectives? And tune in to Roundtable.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Roundtable. Coming to you live from Beijing. Roundtable.
Connecting China and the world.
We bring you fun and timely discussions about what's affecting our lives everywhere, every day. Tune in to Roundtable, where the East meets the West, and understanding is the goal.
From the African savannah to the ancient Silk Road, we invite you to join us on the front lines to share stories that move the world. Get registered on cgtn.com and submit a video within 3 minutes giving us a self-introduction to prove your presentation skills, language ability, and news sense as a reporter, presenter, podcaster, or social media influencer. All in all, what we'd call a media challenger. Not only will you be eligible to win up to $10,000, but you'll also get a chance to receive professional multimedia training and be enlisted into the CGTN talent pool. And who knows, there's also the possibility of having your voice heard and felt worldwide. The registration has already begun. CGTN, the Media Challengers. Come and join us and make a difference.
You're listening to a flashback of Roundtable, an in-depth discussion on the hottest topics in China. You're listening to Roundtable with myself, Haya, joined by Huang Shen and Lai Ning. Coming up, it is estimated that more than 100 million crayfish are consumed in China every year, and a lot of it will be eaten around this time of year. Summer. Yeah, and for Chinese people, when we talk about summer, immediately we think of buckets and plates of crayfish towers, made up of crayfish, and it's a great delicacy for a summer night. The craze for crayfish may have inspired creativity as well. Creative minds in this country have come up with all kinds of innovations for one subject, the crayfish. So we'll break it down for you, and bear in mind, not all of them, these patents have been approved yet, but it's definitely fascinating to see where all this creativity is going into the crayfish. And our heart-to-heart segment will be on its way. We answer your voice questions. To participate, please send a voice memo to EZFM Roundtable at foxmail.com. Our podcast listeners can find us at Roundtable on Apple Podcast. Give us a 5-star review if you may, or at least let us know what you think of the show, and stay connected. We appreciate it so much. And now our Roundtable as we continue today's discussion. Seafood-savvy Chinese are eating more crayfish at restaurants and through e-commerce purchases. Resembling small lobsters, the delicacy has become a summer night delight on dining tables and for late-night snacks. The love for this crustacean has also spurred...
Kínában a különböző írásrendszer miatt ez nem jelentett ilyen
1,500 patents.
That's so much creative juice that goes into that 小龙虾,
I'm sure people can get creative about eating crayfish because it is very hard to peel.
Oh.
Because it's a, like you said earlier, it's a crustacean.
Yeah.
So some of the fun or some of the pain in eating it is to try and get it out of the shell.
Right. So this 小龙虾 did not used to be something of, synonymous to a great night out in the summer.
No, like when I was a little kid, I mean, in my small town.
Que se llama Danza de la Juventud. Fue en 1939 cuando el rey del pop del oeste de China, Wang Lopin, escuchó la canción Weibo en su viaje por el oeste del país y adaptó la letra al chino mandarín. La música es brillante.
Beijing Hubei province last year, and because of Wuhan and the coronavirus pandemic, people wanted to show.
La sélection en l'absence de Sergio Busquets revenait très tranquillement sur la situation.
Solo entre...
Mike 0 Kilo Lima Bravo. Mexico 0 Kilo Lima Bravo. 59 for you.
KM 0 KLB 59.
Thank you very much. 73.
India Kilo Queen. Queen again. India Kilo Queen. Echo Whiskey 6 Whiskey QRZ. Echo Whiskey 6 Whiskey Echo Whiskey 6 Whiskey QRZ. Again?
Yeah, 2 Echo 0 Hotel Golf Tango.
Hotel?
2 Echo 0 Hotel Golf Tango.
Circle 0 Hotel Golf Tango 59. Thank you, QRZ. QRZ Echo Whiskey 6 Whiskey. India Kilo Queen.